Thank you, Janos. Thank you. Anyways, first of all, thank you, the C2G and Telly, for inviting me to this event, and I'm very happy to be part of that with other like the panelists, and also the thanks for your distinguished audiences participating in person, also the battery. So I like to give my 2 cents on regarding like the questions what the journalists raised. And first of all, I like to point it out the what is the role of the CDL in the Asia Pacific, and then I think it's first of all I wanted to say it must be stressed that the role of the Asia Pacific is very important, not only in terms of like managing risk of the global overshoot, but also more broadly in terms of like the global climate governance. And then this is because of multiple reasons, but I will suggest there's 3 specific reasons there. And first of all, that, and as we know, Asia is the most populous region in the world, and with growing, like rapidly growing economies. So many of the like the future actually GHG emissions and CO2 emissions will come from Asia, not from the North America, not from the Europe. So the Asia has a huge, like, and then challenges how to, mitigate and quickly. So I think it is important to understand the context. Is actually there's a challenge of actually achieving the Paris climate targets or achieving net zero target it's basically about how quickly and how radically the Asia economy can decarbonize. And then also this is also quite challenging question. Is because the Asia is also Asian economy is also a lot of dependent on heavy industries, whose emissions are very difficult to eliminate directly at the sources. As Andy pointed out, there's a lot of like residual hard to abate like emissions. One of the example is like steel and iron and steel industries. 80%, more than nearly 80% of iron steel is produced in Asia, and more specifically in the 4 countries: China, India, Japan, and South Korea. And those like in the production of iron steel production is very hard to eliminate. And how to achieve that, we need a CDL to compensate those like little emissions. And also, so the Asia economy needs the CDL to achieve net zero. But also, it is important to understand that Asia alone cannot achieve net zero by its own, because it's a huge a lot of like the residual emissions coming from like Asian and these industries, and many of actually the IM modeling research suggesting in a scenario achieving net zero global net zero CO2 emissions by 2050s, Asia has a lot of like residual emissions which will be compensated and by the CDL in other regions, probably like Latin America and other countries. So this suggests Asia, for Asia Pacific achieving net zero, they need a like de facto by nature we need a lot of like international corporations achieving net zero. And so, this is in some way the reality what we are facing now, and whether we are actually facing the possibility of overshoot or not, this is a reality. And then, so we need to have actually very urgent political discussion about how to deliver the CDL in Asia Pacific. So that was the first reasons. And then second reason why the Asia Pacific is important for, particularly in the context of the overshoot, is because, as many other people already pointed out, this is a region also that many of the vulnerable community lives and suffering the damage of climate change, and like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Philippines, name a few. And so in some sense, and then Asia Pacific is as the it's a little bit like controversial to say, but it's Asia Pacific. It's both the victims and victimizer at the same time. I know it's a bit of controversial to say, but so the Asia Pacific as the front line, and both in terms of mitigation and adaptations. However, and this is the third reason I think is important, and it's we have to be very careful to and remember that Asia Pacific is very diverse and very heterogeneous, and culturally, socially, and economically, and of course politically, and also in terms of the impacts of climate change. And many of the Asian Pacific countries suffer from impacts. It should not be equated to the, like, for instance, Japan, and then the developed countries, and then one of the largest, CO2 greenhouse emitters, and also only the G7 member from the Asia. So Japan has a much higher responsibility addressing climate change, and then should not be equated to the other countries. So these differences is very important to understand. Then question comes down, so what, how the internal politics within Asia Pacific. And I think the comparison to this Europe is in some way, I think, it's helpful to understand. And unlike Europe, we don't have, in Asia Pacific, doesn't have supranational institution like the European Union, which could coordinate different interests among countries and set a common goal for the regions. And of course, the ASEAN and ASEAN should probably play a more active role in bringing neighboring countries together. But I think more fundamental question is what will bring the Asia Pacific countries together? In Europe, EU was created to avoid another war in Europe. And it's built on a common path, European values, like human rights or freedom expressions. And perhaps my sense is this is not be the case for the Asia Pacific. I think rather than the common values, I think it's a common problem and common challenge probably would bring unite very heterogeneous Asia Pacific countries. And I think the climate change could be one of the way to unifying forces. And we should put the CDR in the context of the conversation, how the Asia Pacific can work together as as a common challenge. So the second point regarding the third the questions about a lot of CDR, Asia Pacific and SIM, I want to give a little bit of my thought. And I think I think the role of the Asia Pacific and SL debates, it's a bit of ambiguous and then unclear what they can do. And first of all, I think currently it is very unlikely any Asia Pacific countries will start researching or developing the SIM technologies by themselves. And so from a technological point of view, I cannot see any possible future scenario which Asia Pacific will play a very active role in developing and deploying CDR SRM technologies, except to China. And this is probably partly true for the Europe as well. And Europe, in some way, they were actually the initiator of the global SRM debates, and it started the global debate. But now they shift the agenda. Then they are more focusing on CDR and net zero, and it seems like a little bit putting the SRM option aside, at this moment. And also so. I think if I imagine the future scenario that what the role of the European Union, Europe in an SR debates, I don't think Europe will initiate the technology developments. That are actually that they are more very cautious approach and taking cautious approach. And one example is I think last year the small group of social scientists from Europe and particularly from Netherlands, they started a campaign called the non-use agreements on solar geoengineering. So basically proposing the global moratorium of SRM research and developments. And I think this probably would likely be the position taken by the European Unions and other European countries. And then, but I think when we think about the future of this SRM debate, we can't rule out a lot of the two big nations in the world, and US and China. And technically speaking, these are two countries most capable to use the SRM if they wanted to. And also the geopolitically, we cannot do we cannot have the meaningful discussions about SRM without them. And then so the question is, how would this rivalry relationship between in US and China will characterize the nature of the SRM debates? Will two countries will compete each other's developing technologies, or do they like incorporate each other's? And I think the both scenario is plausible. And my guess is Europe will come into the middle of this debate and try to open up more democratic and inclusive conversations. Then what about the and this is some way how the Europe will engage in international politics through building like norms and international norms. Then what about the Asia Pacific? What the role of the Asia Pacific can play? And Asia Pacific at the heart of the geopolitical tension between US and China. We are geographically located in the middle of them. And then I think the SLM will be part of this geopolitical tension between US and China. So I think the Asia Pacific has a very important role, not because Asia Pacific country has interest in developing technologies, but because the Asia Pacific is a center of the geopolitical tension between the US and China. And I think we need to think about what the Asia Pacific countries can play, not escalating the tension between US and China, but how to have more dialogue and constructive discussions. So, and that's my 2 cents.